Good morning to everybody in Grenada and the diaspora worldwide. We're here this morning to talk agriculture as per usual on a Saturday morning. And as the main man would say, welcome, welcome, welcome. We as the Equalizers broadcasted in from Confaro in Paraclete. So we're here for another great discussion. We have with us the man himself, Royal Edwards. He's like an encyclopedia of knowledge on agriculture. So anytime I know he's going to give us a little time on the show, I get excited. So today you're not going to hear a lot from me as you normally do. It's not going to be that kind of interactive back and forth. It's going to be leaving the floor really to listen to Royal. I might interject a little bit and ask a little provocative question here and there, but we're going to have Royal again. So, Royal, are you online? Are you with us?
Listeners, good morning. Yes, I'm online. I trust that you can hear me. I'm getting a feedback though, but I am online. How are you?
Okay, I heard you loud and clear there. The technician is just playing with his numbers. He gave me the thumbs up, so that means you're good. So how have you been, Royal?
I've been quite busy, but grateful. I think it's important to find the right balance. So I've been working on ensuring that I have the balance between diet, exercise, work, and also finding time for mental health and family and God, so has been good, and I'm grateful for another day.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. Well, today the discussion we're having is on marketing agriculture. So we want to look at government are proposing to have a Farmers Appreciation Day. So we want to talk about that. Also, want to talk about CARICOM in industrial policy, looking at food sovereignty, food security, and how we can fit into that, or what else there is in the industrial policy that we should be paying attention to. So, and anything else that you want to talk about. Obviously, if I'm talking marketing, I'll talk a little bit about marketing board and share my thoughts on what we should be doing to kind of raising the profile in terms of agriculture and marketing board. So the first one, Ruel, is government is planning this Farmers Appreciation Day. I have a lot of thoughts about that myself, but what do you think? What's your thoughts in terms of this Appreciation Day? My view is that anything that lifts farmer up is a good thing, but I just think there's more to it than that. Go ahead.
No, Josh, thank you for that. I think is to first of all identify what I would say are the upside of any initiative that speaks to producers. Very often, sometimes we consider producers to be marginalized. We consider producers to be people who weren't well endowed in school, etc., and is pro poor, but they provide, I think, a very important, play a very important role in society. Without producers, we are not able to eat.
Yeah.
Without producers, it means that the world is going to go to starve. And very often, sometimes in our context, because we are from small island developing states with very small populations and small land mass, you find that our farmers or producers have very small holdings, quarter acre, 1 acre. But when we compare that to countries just as Guyana, you have holdings where it's, 1,000 acres or
Mhm.
2,000 acres or 3,000 acres, then the view is totally different. So producers, I think it's very important, a day of appreciation to recognize what they do to uplift them, I think is useful. It can encourage more people to get into the space. But I believe we can go further without the benefit of understanding exactly what the day is going to entail. We have an opportunity, I think, to craft this into a week where we really look at agriculture and agribusiness within a fuller context. And one of the days can be that sort of awards and recognition. But it also
Yes.
provides a space for looking at the technologies that are available in agriculture that can be adapted to our conditions because of our terrain. Some of the mechanization that might be possible in a big country or a country that is flat like a Barbados may not be applicable to a Grenadian context. I think if it's a single day as well, there could be an opportunity to carve out a period to discuss what are the career opportunities that are available within the broader sector outside of just production. What are the
Uh-huh.
careers that are available? Because one of the areas that I believe we have struggled is the whole aspect of research, development, and innovation, and
Yeah.
being able to take those research ideas from within the lab to then transfer those into the actual field for production. And we do need people, to be available to do research, to do development, to do value addition, to investigate new varieties, to investigate new products, to investigate new planting approaches so that
Mhm.
we can continually adapt and adopt the new technologies that are available. So I think it's a good idea. I applaud the administration or whomever is doing this, but it may also create an opportunity to go deeper into a week or a few days to really expose the benefit that can be derived from advancing in people's mind the role of agriculture and food security.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with everything that you've said there. Uh, I've been fortunate in terms of I've lived in different countries and I've seen how they do agriculture week. Even in Barbados, they have that agriculture week going, and one of the things I enjoy the most when I go to those things, quite often they would have a day in terms of their genetic breed where they're showcasing all the different breeds of animal, be it cattle's, pigs, etc. And one of the fun things they do, they have like beading. So they'll have all these animals in the pens or whatever, and people will bid for them in terms of trying to get a good price in terms of that. And that usually is great fun. One of the other things that in my mind that I look forward to is like the flowers. We we should have an appreciation of all the kind of flowers that we have in Grenada. They should be on display. There should be cuttings for people to buy and take away. It's there's so much that we can do in terms of agriculture. The technical bits in terms of hydroponics and all the different technology that's going around. All of these things should be so showcased in Agricultural Week, and it has to be a must. All the schools have to visit, whether it's in the stadium, whether it's in big open places in different constituencies that we have or parishes. It has to be inclusive of the whole nation, all the schools, because if we are saying agriculture underpins our society, food sovereignty is so important, then we have to get the kids involved from day one. And there's so much to agriculture besides just growing foods that we have to kind of expose the full range. And I think we can only do that with an agricultural week. One of those days, as you said, could be Farmers Appreciation Days, and we should have lectures as well, cutting edge lectures in terms of agriculture, etc. And I'm sure that there's some that I missed out. The secondary processing, that has to play a big part in terms of it. The food and nutrition, how we cook food, that has to play a big part in. There's so much that underpins agriculture. I think we're selling ourselves short if we just have a Farmers Appreciation Day. Obviously, any Farmers Appreciation Day is welcome. But in terms of nation building, we have to really take this thing a little bit more systematic. So we have to be looking at a nation. What is the policy for agriculture? What is the strategic plan for agriculture? How do we prepare for the next natural disaster? So it has to be fully inclusive in terms of, agriculture and all the components. As you said, we have to look at scholarships, how we use scholarships. We have to make it attractive. Are we going to send people to Canada, to England, to Vietnam, who has similar terrain to us? And I think it's a real opportunity for us to finally start organizing agriculture fully. The piecemeal approach, we have to move beyond that. I know I said I'll let you talk, but I know I've been talking for a little while. So I'll get back to you and see if you have any further thoughts on that whole thing.
No, Seban accept just to add that, we do a lot of what I call expos. So, around World Food Day, we would have an expo, and having had the benefit of visiting the AgroFest in Barbados,
Yeah, that's a wonderful something. Yeah, go on.
Participating in the event, Trinidad Agri-Investment Forum in Guyana, in the Denby Agricultural Show in Jamaica. I've visited the Sri Lanka. I spent a week there looking at their sector. I've been to agriculture shows in the US and in the UK. We have an opportunity to probably look at around the World Food Day, where there is that appetite for a conversation around food and agriculture, to expand beyond just an expo with displaying products, to really make this into a broader week where we look at, as you said, at the technology. We have the technical sessions, we have the school competitions. We look at the incentives regime. We have a conversation around finance and agricultural development.
Yes.
We demonstrate some of the successes that we've achieved, because there are successes. We look at the products that are being developed, and how we can commercialize those, and bring in the private sector on board. So I think the Farmers Appreciation Day is a good start. It's a good place to start, to get into the minds and the psyche of the people of our population, the need to recognize the important role that our producers play, and I think that can become the platform or the launching pad for a greater conversation. I believe we do have a lot of thoughts and ideas, but is to look at what is going to be the approach for implementation to get things done. Because what's needed is the ability to implement things. You know, we have lovely plans and ideas and strategies that have been developed over several years. How do we, as a country, separate ourselves? And how do we, as a country, bring out the comparative advantages that we have? So, you know, what are the technologies on post-harvest management that can be employed to extend the shelf life of some of the key products that we have, that can allow us to tap into and expand markets where we can be competitive? And I think that is a good opportunity to segue into, you know, looking at marketing, you know, because very often, sometimes we miss what the big picture is, you know, and we believe at times we can compete with a Guyana or Jamaica or a Vietnam and Philippines and even a Brazil or Costa Rica, and very often we can't, simply because of our size, our scale of production, our cost of production, the limited use of technology. We cannot compete on the international market with some of those countries. But there are spaces where we can be successful. And I believe that the two things I want to mention here, first of all, is on the export-driven marketing. That on the export market, it requires coordination. If you don't have sufficiently large enough aggregators on exporting requires coordination, because you cannot say to a country or a buyer on an international market, even in the regional market, that you could only send him once this week, and then he doesn't know when he's going to get from you again, or when he or she is going to get from you. That will not happen. You know, they will not commit themselves to buying from a country that cannot sustainably supply them on a regular basis at a competitive price and of a good quality. So there is need for an organization or that kind of a support mechanism to ensure that you can coordinate exports. That is one. And then secondly, the export has to be based on products that you can be competitive with. So if we think of a Grenada context, cocoa is a space that Grenada is competitive because of the fine flavor cocoa that we produce. One of 6 or 7 countries in the Caribbean and generally around the world, the Trinitario. We know that we are the flavor, and the African is basically the bulk. That is a space. If we think of let's say fruits and vegetables, soursop presents the biggest opportunity for Grenada in terms of exports, for which we have not even done enough to really exploit in terms of both increased production and productivity, but also the post-harvest management side of things. So, we under the work I did with the USAID across the region, we were able to extend the shelf life of cassava by 18 days without which is a perishable item. We've also done the same thing for dasheen, and we've opened up opportunities coming out from St. Vincent back into the US and into Europe, in France, looking at alternative post-harvest management practices. There is a need, I think, for us as a people to look at how do we do this for soursop, and how do we do this for something like breadfruit, where you have a comparative advantage and no one else can compete with you in soursop, really, in terms of fresh soursop. So those are some of the things I think we need to look at in terms of being able to dominate on the export market. It will not be for bananas. Grenada cannot compete with bananas on the export market. The Dominican Republic is huge. Latin America is huge. Even St. Vincent and St. Lucia and Dominica has bigger production platforms for bananas than Grenada. So we have to change our mind about that. So we have to look at what are the things that we can export, what are the things we're competitive at, and really go hard in developing those so that you can exploit. Even in nutmeg, that still remains an area where we can do well. And then finally, Josh, because I want to get back to you so that you can ask the question. When we think marketing locally, there is always that conversation of a battle between producers and a marketing space, an organization responsible for marketing. And I think it's misreading the role of such an institution. Yeah.
Yeah.
Producers are producing, and they should have a cooperative, they should have a body, they should have an aggregator that supports the pulling together, because no purchaser wants to deal with 200 people. They're not into the business of purchasing from 200 people. They are in the business of supplying a product or supplying a service. If we think of a hotel or a restaurant, they are supplying a service. They want to focus on servicing. If you think of a supermarket, they are providing a product. And so I think there is a space for local aggregation that needs to graduate from what I call the production-driven model, where we plant based on tradition and history, and then try to find a market, and then blame everybody else for not finding the market. Or we should therefore plant on a market-driven model, which is you understand what the market is asking for, you assess the data, and then you plant according to what the requirements and the demand is. And we've experimented with that in St. Vincent with a supermarket, and tremendous success. We've also done this in other parts of the world, in Tanzania, in Sri Lanka. Tremendous success, and I think we have an opportunity to sort of parachute that model into a Grenadian space.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's wonderful information. So you can see why I'm more of an advocate of a agriculture week rather than just a farmers appreciation day, because we have not tapped into one of the critical areas that I think or spaces that exist for farmers or an aggregator, and that is the link between tourism and agriculture. That is a massive market, but I fear that you know the infrastructure and the thinking and the collaboration and even policy or legislation is not there. But that needs to be part of agriculture week. How we link agriculture with tourism? A massive potential market.
Yeah, I would say that this goes beyond the agriculture week, and I want to pull from a model that exists in Jamaica. So you have this tourism linkage cluster, and it's beyond even agriculture. They look at tourism and its linkage with other sectors. So when we think of small and micro enterprises that are involved in some other value addition work, the producing of soaps, the producing of some of the other necessary inputs, the skewers and other things that can be used in the hospitality sector. And what Jamaica has successfully done is that they were able to bring the various stakeholders around the table, and basically they've developed a policy approach that essentially says that we want to strengthen the linkage between tourism and the other sectors to prevent the leakage that exists or typically exists within the tourism sector, where more than 90% of the dollar goes back out. So that is one. And then secondly, the committee agreed on what is called a performance incentives regime, meaning that the sector will still get the incentive that it needs because it's a very important sector, meaning the tourism sector. But that incentive, your ability to draw down on that incentive is based on performance of employment, but also performance of local procurement. And I think that is a challenge that we in Grenada and in some of the smaller islands have been faced with. How do we create a framework that, yes, provides the continued incentives for the tourism sector to do well, but that it is based on performance. It's based on how much you purchase locally. It's based on the employment, etc. So that you developed all sectors cohesively and coherently, and not that sort of imbalance that we experience, where the incentives sometimes favor importation of items. So if we think of food, and you get a blanket cash blanche incentive to import, concession to import, without any requirement for local procurement, without any requirement from buying locally, then it does not provide the right policy space for producers to be able to profitably and sustainably integrate into the tourism sector, because it's easier to just order a container that you know is going to land every 2 weeks. You know you're going to get that container like clockwork, than having to procure from 250 farmers locally and having to call 250 farmers. There are some logistics that is involved in that. So I think as we think about this, this is beyond a week. If I can use the liberty to suggest that it's really a should become a standard feature as part of looking at the development of the country, a standard feature of having that standing committee, standing grouping that looks at and comes up with these policy recommendations for government, comes up with this incentives regime, and really monitor the performance of the tourism industry in terms of being able to utilize those incentives. I think it has to be both the carrot and the stick,
Yeah.
where if you want to get the carrot, which is the incentive, then you have to also be prepared to receive the stick, which is the local procurement.
Yeah, okay, that's wonderful advice. I know, Rel, that some countries have, dabbled with the idea that they would identify about three or four, sometimes five local product, and they will get consensus with the hoteliers and see whether or not they can target these products so that the local farmers can supply them. Usually it's something that the local farmers can supply, and usually it's something that it's imported in big volume. So it's almost like becomes an import substitution project or idea. Any thoughts on that in for Grenada?
Yeah, no, I think the stakeholders should decide. You have the producers coming together with the purchasers, along with the policymakers. So you have that whole of society approach, and they can identify what are the 4 or 5 products that they want to grow entirely. And I think there are some parameters that you may want to consider. First of all, you want to consider the experience of producers and the knowledge to be able to do so, the climatic conditions to be able to grow them, the land, whether you have availability of tech pack, the interest of farmers, the profitability around it, the perishability. So there are a few criteria that you would want to use to be able to identify this, but this could, I think, something that can be decided by the grouping. If the grouping decides, the purchasers along with the producers and policymakers around the table decide what those items are, then you have buy-in from all the major stakeholders, rather
Yeah.
than it's been decided and just handed down. The likelihood of success and the likelihood of a sustainable approach with having the parties around the table decide, I think, would provide for greater sustainability. So it's a model that the CTA used before. It's a model that is been used in Guyana as well. And I think that there's an opportunity to use that here in Grenada.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for that again. Now, listening to you, sharing your thoughts, your views, your experience, invaluable. One of the things that was coming through listening to you was that there is a need for somebody or an institution like a marketing board, call it whatever you want, a consolidator, to be involved in terms of the agriculture sector if we are going to make progress, especially if we're going to make progress in terms of regional trade, yet alone extra regional trade. And I know we've been waiting for a little while now to see what this new consolidator in Grenada is going to look like. But it seems to me that in order for us to really move forward and market Grenada products, we have to bring all the stakeholders together, including public and private entities, and agree a strategy how we're going to move forward. Now, I know, in many countries, including ours, the state plays a critical part or a critical role in terms of helping create institutions and support them in terms of seed funding for the first few years. It might be the first 5 or 10 years or so. And I know, for example, the tourism authority is supported by government. I know GIDC is also supported in terms of subvention. Do you think that an institution that consolidates agriculture in terms of regional, extra-regional, export, etc., development, do you think there is a need for government to consider how it will support that entity, be it financially or otherwise?
I think that one is a ticklish one, Josh. The two things I would say here. The first one is the policy approach, and if the policy approach is that the food, and sometimes when we think of food sovereignty, we really miss what the meaning of food sovereignty is. And when we speak of food sovereignty, you're more or less talking about the right to food. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at a focus on people, food for people, the value, and to be able to protect food providers, how localized your food system is. You're looking at nature and the protection of nature. You're looking at the knowledge and skill set. So food sovereignty is a broader context that speaks of an ecosystem. So I think the important thing is to what is the policy approach by the political directorate. And if the policy approach is that it's a right to food, or it's a public good, that is a public good, and linking that, for example, with the sustainable development goals that speaks about zero hunger, etc., then there is a case that can be made for government intervention to support the coordination of the procurement of food. That is one way. If a second approach is that it is more of a private sector driven model, then that can also work. And then the policy approach may be that we have the social safety nets for the least fortunate, so that they can also have right to food. So it's really dependent on the policy approach and how the political directorate and policymakers wants to develop the sector. If it's more of a free market, then you find that the government intervention would be more around incentives. If it's more around a controlled approach to the development of the sector, then you find that government may have a more, I would call, a forceful intervention. And this is not unusual. So for example, when we think of government intervention within economies, it can be via state enterprises, it can be via development financial institutions, or it can be via sovereign wealth funds. Yes, when you think of direct government intervention.
Yeah.
We do not have sovereign wealth funds. Some of the oil companies, etc., they have sovereign wealth funds.
Yeah.
But we also have development financial institutions like a development bank. And then we have state enterprises. Those state enterprises can be 100% owned by government, can be joint venture, a government can be a minority shareholder in a state enterprise. If despite they are minority shareholder, you can still term them state enterprises. So there are different vehicles that can be used to advance an agenda. It really depends on the policy approach.
Okay.
In our context, the state has a direct involvement, and if the state has a direct involvement, then you want to have a combination of policy and a combination of capital invested when it's needed at the appropriate time to ensure that the mandate of the institution can be achieved. Somebody made a comment on the 25 by 2025 online. So if I can use an opportunity to respond to that, I was part, Josh, of actually coming up with the writing this 2025 by 2025 vision. Prime Minister Motley made a call for reducing the region's food import, and I was part of the team that led the development of that piece of work. Yes, there has been an adjustment to 2030, and there are things I think that is still required to be able to sufficiently monitor and report on progress. And I would be happy to have a separate conversation on that at some point.
Yeah, wonderful. And we thank you in advance for the work in terms of that project. One of the things I want to share with you, so I'll take over your talking space now. When I was very involved in terms of poultry, one of the opportunities that I saw that I felt it was missing, it was the linkages with poultry and the existing institutions. So I looked at the school feeding program. I looked at all the state institutions from parliament to prisons, etc. And I felt that there was an internal market that can be tapped into, and by tapping into it, the private business would develop and the state institutions would benefit. And we had the potential or possibility of creating that reliability of supply that often is criticized as not being there. And I think in many ways, when we have any aggregate body that's looking towards nation building or providing a vital service to the nation, I think the first point of looking is the linkage in terms of what currently exists that we can tap into before kind of sometimes looking for some big great ideas, because sometimes what you're looking for is in front of you. And I certainly found that in terms of the poultry industry, there was a need to have that linkage throughout the society in terms of linking poultry to the institutions. And so I believe that there is opportunities in terms of linkages, be it an aggregator for the farmers, be it an aggregator for poultry, etc., etc. I think we always have to look at the current opportunities that's before us before we go running abroad.
Yeah. So the development of policies, and you find that is a major function of governments, to develop policies, etc., has different aspects of it. The first one of the aspects is, what is the objective of that policy? And so if we think of stimulating local production and consumption, then that is the objective of the policy. Where we often fall down is on the instrument to implement that policy. And there are various instruments that can be used. One instrument is incentive. So that is an instrument that can be used. But another critical instrument is what is called government procurement. And government procurement has a role of actually can stimulate nascent or new and emerging industries and companies. So without picking an actual winner in terms of a company, they can pick an industry or a subsector and use government procurement as part of the tools, within the toolbox to develop that. So if you're talking about, let's say, the school feeding program, and we're talking about stimulating local production, one
Uh-huh.
way to stimulate local production is to be able to create a market for the goods that are being produced. And
Mm,
one way to do that is through government procurement. So when we look at what's taking place now in the United States, a lot of the contracts that the government is terminating, um, the US government is a big purchaser,
mhm,
yeah, of goods and services to stimulate the development of the economy.
mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the same philosophy can be used across, and it's been used generally across the world. Very often we find that our government procurement or public procurement may favor extra regional supplies.
Yeah.
If that is reoriented to local supplies, then it can have the knock-on effect of stimulating local production because you've created a ready market for
Uh-huh.
that. And it will not be for everything. So, we cannot grow wheat and soy competitively, but we can, based on the size of our market, we can do poultry competitively. We can do other meats
Yeah.
competitively. You
Mm,
can create a local market by
mm,
using the government procurement as an instrument to
mhm.
begin to stimulate deploy. In other words, creating what is called a base demand. Yeah.
Mhm.
So if you
Mhm.
create that base demand, it means there is room now for economies of scale so that you can expand.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful, and I just think that is a real opportunity for us, or for government to exploit, really. And whilst you were talking, I was thinking of the old people home as well, and that needs, whether it's poultry or whether it's tomatoes or whether it's carrot, cabbages, etc. So there is something there that we can exploit, and as you say, this system is being used already across the world. I guess more so now in the US. Well, I want to change the talk a little bit and go towards CARICOM industrial policy. I know you've been involved in some of the work in terms of upgrading policies. And I want to look at, you mentioned it a little bit before in terms of food sovereignty and security. I wonder if you can flush out for us if there's any opportunity in terms of CARICOM policy for the OECS or Grenada.
Yeah. So maybe just to sort of orient this. So in 2012, the CARICOM Secretariat commenced the process of developing an industrial policy to reflect the objectives of the revised Treaty of Chagaramas.
Yeah,
Then in 2019, another version was developed in 2022 into 2023. Suriname led the work in looking at a discussion paper around it. And I've been asked now to help move that needle and to sort of update the CARICOM industrial policy to get it to a stage where it can move to implementation.
yeah.
The first focus of the policy, the earlier versions, was on manufacturing, and so manufacturing was the key aspect of it.
Mhm.
What we've now advanced is an industrial ecosystems based approach to the CARICOM industrial policy, and we've identified 12 industrial ecosystems. I'll just quickly run through them. So agriculture or agri-food, fisheries, and processing as one. Construction sector, cultural and creative. You have digitalization. You have energy, education and human capital development, health and well-being, small, micro, and medium-sized enterprises, non-food manufacturing, research, development, and innovation, mobility and transportation, and then tourism. Those are the 12 industrial ecosystems. And then we've
Mhm.
also identified 4 cross-cutting issues. So competition, how do you manage competition across the region? Financing industrial development, intellectual property, and then the fourth one is on standards. So consultations is happening now across the region, where the team of us we're talking to different stakeholders to get their feedback at the different ministries. I think when we think of the small island developing states, including Grenada, the OACS, there are 2 areas that I think emerge within the ecosystems that we can pay attention to and creates opportunity. The first one is what I call weightless goods. Because of our cost of production, let's say comparing with a Trinidad and Tobago that has a lower energy profile, because of our small size, sometimes we think we may not be able to compete in the actual heavy goods, but we
Mhm.
can do very well in the weightless goods category. When I speak of weightless goods category, we're talking about educational services, research and development, professional services. Who said that an architect and an engineer from Grenada cannot provide his or her services across the region? That is one. And I think the second area where we have an opportunity, even outside of food, that we can do very well is in the cultural and creative industry. Just look, Grenada, Sir Blackadan was able to win the Soca Monarch in Trinidad last night. It means that we can compete in some of the non-traditional areas that is not dependent on size, but is dependent on our human capital and on our human brains. So that is one. I know for you the emphasis is on agriculture, and so even within that space, there is an opportunity to create what I call within the industrial policy a sub-regional approach or a corridor, a production corridor. For example, if we take the OECS and Barbados, that can be a corridor. Or
Uh-huh.
if we link a Grenada, St. Vincent, Trinidad together, we can create that sort of a southern Guyana, that sort of a southern corridor where we are able to competitively produce a few items.
Uh,
Yes. It means we have the ability as well to do some value addition for the items that we can be competitive with. So a few weeks ago, I was trying to connect a processor in Guyana with producers in Grenada. We even checked St. Vincent, we checked Trinidad for cocoa beans because Guyana does not have that amount of cocoa beans for our processing. So,
mhm.
so we have an opportunity, I think, to carve out some comparative advantages within a CARICOM context, in the
Uh,
spices space, in the cocoa space, in the soursop space, in some of the root crop space, in some of the fruits and vegetable space, where we are able to successfully supply our neighbors.
mhm.
We can become the lead in interacting with some of the supermarket chains and develop a very strong supply chain for 2 or 3 items. Sometimes what happens is we try to go too broad, so we go a mile broad and 1 inch deep. When we can go quarter-mile broad, rather than 100 products, we develop good value chains for 5 products, and we go very deep so that those value chains can be integrated into regional supply chains and into international supply chains. And I think that creates a space for building more profitable enterprises, more sustainable enterprises, and really developing the Grenada brand in the food space.
Yeah, I like that, Ruel. And again, I always listen to you attentively. And whilst you were talking, I was thinking, but that's what the colonialists did. They had cocoa, nutmeg, banana, about 3 or 4 crops, and that's all they concentrated on, and very profitable. And I think it was sustained for a number of years, probably centuries. So the model that you're talking about has already been proven. It's just how do we create it and how do we sustain it? Because I know in terms of secondary processing, we have nutmeg oil that commands a real high price on the international market. And when you're talking about cocoa and Guyana, I was smiling. I was thinking, whoa, I just hope they can pay a fair price. And then GCNA in business again. So those are wonderful kind of ideas that you have, and it's wonderful that you're pushing those things behind the scene. Mhm.
I don't know if it's behind the scenes. I think the work that we're doing on the CARICOM industrial policy is a public work. So the team of us that's working on it, which also includes my two of my siblings, Dr. Kimoy and my brother Kenley, they're involved in helping pull this together. The
Uh-huh.
thing about it is that the model exists. So
Yeah,
the model exists is a matter, and the model is simple. It's a market-driven approach. You're
yeah.
producing what the market is asking for, and that is complemented by trade policies and the trade infrastructure. The model exists. So
Mhm.
it's a matter, I think, for us to just continue to implement the model. Yes, with technology, things change. It upends industry, so you have to change it. With changing in geopolitical dynamics on the international space, where you have different countries would sign different trade agreements, etc., and it means the sort of access you would have had to markets, you no longer have them. So that's where your trade negotiation comes in. That's where your policy approach comes in. So once you have the market driven model and you have a complementary trade policy, then it means you are now able to build the production base. I do believe that our producers are able to produce the requirements for markets once the market is guaranteed to a certain extent and you have the trade infrastructure. I had an opportunity to sit around the table in the Dominican Republic, and the private sector, they were around the table working hand in glove with the policymakers to negotiate trade agreements. And so the trade agreements were reflective of what the private sector felt they had the capacity to do. I think there is an opportunity to better integrate in our local spaces, the private sector, because they are the ones that are producing, in how we establish these trade agreements, in negotiating trade agreements, and in crafting policies, so that it means that once we have those in place, we can then take advantage of it. I think there is also an opportunity for us to review the existing agreements that we have, because they're there. So the European, the economic partnership agreement with the EU, that's already in there. We have the CARICOM DR agreement, that's there. We have, the Cotonou agreement. Those things are there. Is to
Mhm.
look at what are the opportunities for us in Grenada, and how do we extract from those agreements a space and develop it. So if within the EPA there is a space for selected agricultural produce, then we should extract that, and we should then build the policy framework around exploiting that opportunity. Yeah.
Mhm.
If within the EPA there is something for the cultural and creative industry, then we should extract that and build or the framework around making sure we can take advantage of those. But what happens is, from time to time, we have those agreements, they end up on the shelf. We do a 1 year, a periodic intervention around it, but there isn't that sustained focus. Who in the private sector is gonna take, a 200-page document and read it? You're busy trying to make sales to meet your payroll. We need to find a way to be able to break this down, bring this information to the private sector. The horse is already on this table, and say, hey, these are the opportunities. That's the incentive regime around it. And this is what we want to do, working together to build out an intervention so that you can be successful.
Okay, wonderful in terms of that. Earl, I have my colleague here who joined me a little bit later than normal, but I just want to ask just get your thoughts on one other area before I give him an opportunity to have a little dialogue with you. Earl, China is being portrayed by the US as some kind of enemy. But I see China as a success, and that's why China is feared, because China is successful. One of the things that I've seen that the Chinese have done in terms of developing their country is joint ventures, especially around technology. And that has helped propel the economy forward. It's quick knit, and I, I just wonder, in terms of your thoughts, do you see any merit in terms of joint ventures? Because as my colleague with me would say, we've been on the kind of the fork and the cutlass and the spade forever, which has been like a backward step, because prior to that, he said we had the bullock. So, you see any merit in some joint ventures to propel us forward? Mm.
Uh, I think there is a space for joint ventures, and I use the word strategic partnerships. Yeah,
Yes. Hmm.
strategic partnerships at the public level, government to government,
Hmm.
strategic partnerships at the government to private level, and strategic partnerships at the private to private level.
Yeah.
That can create what I call the conduit for the transfer of knowledge and the transfer of technology. Yeah.
Hmm.
Very often we just focus on the transfer of what I call cash, foreign direct investment in development. And that has its role because things need to be financed. But
Yeah.
when we think of the Asian tigers and as part of the industrial policy and the ability to develop so quickly, it was a combination of the transfer of knowledge and the transfer of technology in a
Yeah.
strategic partnership approach. And I think that is there is a space for us to look at that. So when we think of digitalization and we think of Estonia, etc., Estonia has done very well with its digital approach. Is there
Hmm.
an opportunity for a strategic partnership, maybe at a government to government, government to private, or even private to private, through
Hmm.
joint venture to transfer? When you
Hmm.
look at the construction industry, and sometimes some of the mega projects that small countries are implementing, the procurement rules doesn't favor a local contractor. You don't have the size of a balance sheet to be able to compete. But if you
Hmm.
are able to partner with an international firm or a regional firm, then that can help through a joint venture you to be able to successfully compete.
Hmm.
One of the viewers or listeners comment on, with all these ideas, what has happened with implementation, or why is implementation so low? And there are 4 points that I want to raise quickly before I move on. First of all, implementation is affected by political will. There have to be a political will and a top commitment from political directorate to implement on pronouncements and policies, etc. So that is one. Then we have to also look at sometimes the legislation makes the bureaucracy and implementation also difficult. So how do we streamline? How do we, update some of the legislation that was written in 1940 and in 1950 for a different era, and where the dynamics is different? So that also affects human implementation. The structure as well that exists within some of the bureaucracy, some of the governments also make implementation difficult. And I think fourthly, human resources, the quality of our human resource also affects implementation, because sometimes we just don't know. And if we don't know, and what makes it even more scary is that sometimes we don't know that we don't know, you know
Yeah.
and you have to know when you don't know. Sometimes we just don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
We don't have the available human resource to get the job done, because people
Yeah.
leave. Sometimes they don't come back. We have the brain drain. Sometimes we have square pegs in wrong holes. Everybody, you do have political appointees and stuff, but you do have people who have the capacity to do the job, but for varying reasons, they will not be given that opportunity. So
Yeah.
those are some of the reasons. There is a new method that is being used all across the world. And here within the region, the Turks and Caicos is using it, and some of the other countries are using it, and it has been advanced by the CDB and the World Bank, something called a delivery unit. And that delivery unit is basically acts like a ministry of implementation, if you want to call it that way, but it's cross-cutting, is interministerial, and it really have different stakeholders a part of those delivery units. So you have a coherent and you have a consistent approach to policy implementation.
Okay, thank you. Well, I saw some of your work and it had a lot of M&E stuff in it, monitoring and evaluation.
Yes, those are important. I had a mentor, a coach, many years ago when I used to be heading one of the institutions in Grenada, Mr. Ian Blanchard, and he often says to me, "You cannot control what you don't measure." Yes. So for you to be able to control, you must measure. It's like our bank account. If you're not monitoring the balance in your account, it means you may just spend, and then you realize you have overspent, and then you have nothing more to spend. So a lot of the things that we do, or that I am involved in, there is that advocacy for monitoring and evaluation and reporting. And I think at the public sector level, in 2008 and 2009, in the height of the financial crisis, there was something called the Caribbean Growth Forum. And as part of that Caribbean Growth Forum, you had a traffic light system of reporting on specific interventions that was outside of a budgetary cycle. So that was outside of the annual budget that the government reads, but you had a public accountability session where the key or lead ministry for a particular area came back and met with the populace to say, these are the things that we promised to do. This is what we've done. And these are the reasons why we didn't achieve what we did not achieve. And I think at a public sector level, if you have this continuous accountability sessions, then it means that it allows the population to be able to contribute to shaping interventions, but to also be taken along the journey in policy implementation. Because at the end of the day, the public servants, policymakers should be operating in the interest of national development and its population.
Yes, thank you for that. I just realized by the technician kind of looking at me, I used up Mr. Pierce's time.
Well, it's enjoying the program and having our brother on the program is very important and effective, and we would like him to continue at a time. But we also want to encourage people to subscribe to the program. This program is basically an agriculture program where we provoke discussion. I don't know if my brother would have time, but one of the things I want him to consider is, to what extent do you think CARICOM leaders capitalize and provide the pertinent information to the stakeholder and to the farmer? Because yes, you could have all this agreement existing, but the stakeholder and the farmer don't know. And it would take the CARICOM leaders or the political directorate to get that information to the stakeholder and to the farmer.
Yeah. So from my vantage point, I see it down the middle, and what I mean by that is that because I am well connected to internets and emails and stuff, I see a lot of the information coming out from the political directorate. So on one hand, I think that they are sharing a lot of information. I think the challenge is the medium or media that is being used, and how can we better tailor those for farmers. So for example, we were working under the USAID project looking at climate data. And climate data, weather information, which affect producers and farmers, are available. But when we did the survey, the farmers were saying, well, I don't get it, but it's available at the meteorological offices. The Met station had it. And the channels to get it to the farmer is what we needed to sort of review to make sure that it can get to the farmer in a form that they can understand it, in a form that they can use it. And I think when we speak of information about agriculture, is to now look at what are the channels that are being used to send this information to farmers, and what is the format that is being sent in so that agricultural stakeholders can make use of those information. And I think that may help solve what I call the gap that exists between our political directorate and the users of information. One quick comment: I don't know that any country can just focus on itself. Responding to one of the comments, I think there is need for that relationship with other markets and other countries. So Grenada, has to also look at exporting, has to look at what it can export, and to also look at import replacement. So it's both import replacement and export. It cannot just be import replacement only.
Yes, my brother, we want to thank you very much for being on the program Studio Galaxy today, and you was with the Galaxy Equalizers. And we'll do everything possible to bridge this gap, and perhaps we could be a medium to help to get that information to the farmers, to the stakeholders, and provoke them to make the information palatable, workable. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Wishing everybody a wonderful day.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, Pierre, my apologies.